Feminist Criticism and the Role of Theory 118, Feminist Criticism and Language 121, page VII, Feminist Criticism and Psychoanalysis 125, What Feminist Critics Do 128, Feminist Criticism and Example 129, Selected Reading 131, 7. Lesbian/Gay Criticism 134, Lesbian and Gay Theory 134, Lesbian Feminism 135, Queer QUEER Theory 137, What Lesbian/Gay Critics Do 143, Lesbian/Gay Criticism and Example 144, Selected Reading 148, 8. Marxist Criticism 150, Beginnings and Basics of Marxism 150, Marxist Literary Criticism General 152, Leninist Marxist Criticism 153, Englesian ENGLSIAN, Engelsian ENGELSIAN Marxist Criticism 155. The Present, The Influence of Althusser ALTHUSSER 156, What Marxist Critics Do 161, Marxist Criticism and Example 162, Selected Reading 164, 9. New Historicism and Cultural Materialism 166, New Historicism 166, New and Old Historicism, Some Differences 168, New Historicism and Foucault FOUCAULT 169, Advantages and Disadvantages of New Historicism 171, What New Historicists Do 172, New Historicism and Example 173, Cultural Materialism 175, How is Cultural Materialism Different from New Historicism 178, What Cultural Materialist Critics Do 180, Cultural Materialism and Example 181, Selected Reading 183, page VIII, 10. Postcolonial Criticism 185, Background 185, Postcolonial Reading 187, What Postcolonial Critics Do 192, Postcolonial Criticism and Example 192, Selected Reading 194, 11. Stylistics 196, Stylistics, A Theory or a Practice 196, A Brief Historical Account from Rhetoric to Philology to Linguistics to Stylistics to New Stylistics 198, How does stylistics differ from standard close reading 201, The Ambitions of Stylistics 203, What Stylistic Critics Do 207, Stylistics Examples 207, Note 211, Selected Reading 212, Item 12, Narratology 214, Telling Stories 214, Aristotle 215, Vladimir Prop PROPP 218, Gerard Genette GERARD GENETTE 222, joined up within quote Narratology 231, What Narratologies Do 233, Narratology and Example 233, Selected Reading 237, 13. Eco-Criticism, Eco-Criticism or Green Studies 239, Culture and Nature 242, Turning Criticism Inside Out 248, What Eco-Critics Do 254, page IX, Eco-Criticism and Example 255, Selected Reading 260, 14. Literary Theory, A History in 10 Events 262, The Indiana University Conference on Style 1958 262, The Johns Hopkins University International Symposium 1966 265, The Publication of Deconstruction and Criticism 1979 267, The Maccabi Affair, capital M, small a c, capital C A B E, Affair, 1981, 268. The publication of Eagleton's Literary Theory and Introduction, 1983, 271. J. Hillis, Hillis, Miller's MLA Presidential Address, 1986, 273. The Strathclyde, Strathclyde University Linguistics of Writing Conference, 1986, 276. The Scandal over Paul D. Mann's Wartime Writings, 1987-88, 279. Jean Baudrillard and the Gulf War Never Happened, 1991, 281. The Sokal, Sokal Affair, 1996-284. 15. Theory After Theory, Last Theory Within Quote, 287. Legacies of Theory, 287. Presentism, 287. Presentism in Practice, 291. Presentism, 291. Presentism in Practice, 295. New Aestheticism, Aestheticism, 299. New Aestheticism in Practice, 302. What to read on New Aestheticism, 307. Cognitive Poetics, 309. Cognitive Poetics in Practice, 312. What to read on Cognitive Poetics, 317. Appendices, 318. Appendix 1, Edgar Allan Poe, The Oval Portrait, 318. Appendix 2, Dylan Thomas, A Refusal to Mourn the Death, by Fire, of a Child in London. Page X. Appendix 3, William Cowper, The Castaway, 322. Where do we go from here? Further reading, 325. General Guides, 325. Reference Books, 326. General Readers, 326. Applying Critical Theory, 12 Early Examples, 327. Against Theory, 329. Index, 331. Acknowledgements. Page XI. Quote, you would better not look down, next line, if you want to keep flying. Unquote. Para. So says the great B.B. King. It is excellent advice, and trying to stick to it helped me to complete this book. I was also greatly helped by the advice and expertise of Anita Roy, Humanities Editor at Manchester University Press. Annie Eagleton was a meticulous and helpful copy editor, and Alison Abel provided valuable help at the proofreading stage. Para. Many of the chapters are based on material I used on the Introduction to Literature and Concepts of Criticism courses at LSU. The former is taught by a team ministry of various colleagues whose comments and advice I have been most grateful for over the past few years. In particular, I must thank Gillian Skinner for reading sections of the manuscript and making a number of extremely useful suggestions, all of which I have acted upon. Nicola King supplied the What Feminist Critics Do checklist, and I have adopted this idea for all the chapters. Of course, all the faults which remain in the book are entirely my own responsibility. Para. Steve Dorney rescued me when my technical expertise proved unequal to the task of producing hard copy from my, within bracket as I thought, cunningly adapted discs. Marianne and Tom enabled me to write the book by giving me frequent periods of study leave from Sainsbury's and Pleiades. The book is for my mother and in memory of my father, Francis Barry. Para. I'll be most interested to hear from any users of this book who might wish to write to me, either via Manchester University Press or directly to English Department, UCW, Aberystwyth, Ceredigion, Ceredigion, SY23 3DY, Welsh, UK. If anything in the book seems unclear or unnecessary or misrepresented or wrongly omitted or fails to acknowledge a page XII source, I'll endeavor to improve or rectify matters in any subsequent edition. Para. Sections of Chapter 3 have previously appeared in a slightly different form in the Use of English and the English Review, Peterbury, LSU. Preface to the second edition. Since the first edition of this book, which was written in the earlier part of the 1990s, literary theory has continued to change and develop. To reflect these developments, I have added a new chapter on eco-criticism, making this the first book of its kind to register the increasing interest in green approaches to literature. Green within quote, para. Of course, my own feelings about the various kinds of theory have changed a bit too. In particular, I now find structuralism rather more interesting than post-structuralism, and to reflect this, I have added a new chapter on narratology, a branch of structuralist theory which lends itself very readily to enjoyable and thought-provoking practical applications. Apart from these new chapters, the second edition is the same book as the first, but with updated bibliographies. Para. With my colleagues at Aberystwyth, I teach on a range of theory courses, notably the RTRT capital, all capital modules, that is reading theory / reading text, whose original 27 mini topics I helped reduce to 4 somewhat large ones. This is more or less what the structuralists Levi-Strauss and Todorov wanted to do to the 31 narrative functions posited by Vladimir Prop. See chapter 12, which shows how keen we are at Aber to apply the lessons of literary theory to our everyday teaching lives. I am very grateful to my colleagues and students for all the discussions we have had about RTRT, and to students on the short theory option over the past few years with whom the various theoretical approaches to narrative have been tried out. Para. The cartoon narrative on page 217 is supplied courtesy of Gray Dudek, D-U-D-E-K, Marketing Division of Pedigree Masterfoods, a division of Mars UK, 2001. I am very grateful to Matthew Frost at MUP for his tireless promotion of this book, which is now part of the Beginnings series, and for nearly everything else to Marianne and Tom, who has graduated since the first edition from Playdays to Game Boy Advance. English Department, Aberystwyth. Preface to third edition. The third edition of Beginning Theory is like the second, an expanded edition rather than a revised edition. In the strictest sense, though corrections have been made throughout and reading list updated. The first edition of this book was built in the 1990s on foundations laid down during the theory wars of the 1980s. A ruthless stripping out of all its period features would risk altering the character of the building too fundamentally and thereby reducing whatever value it might have. So I have opted instead to follow the advice of the property programs on television and have built a couple of extensive chapters. Para. The first new chapter tells the story of theory in a new way, taking advantage of the wider perspective which the passage of time allows. The second takes an introductory look at some of the new some of the new isms, ISMS within quote, which have appeared on the scene since the year 2000 or so. Collectively, those I cover constitute updatings of new historicism and cultural materialism, and of stylistics and narratology, and I chose them partly because they thereby continue the theory story which I started telling in the first edition. As this is a book about beginning theory, I have not attempted to cover recent developments in such fields as ethical theory, space theory, and body theory. Para. I am grateful to my colleague Sarah Prescott for discussions about the new material and to the theory team at ABER for the continuing stimulus of reading theory, reading text, or capital EN 30930 as it is fondly known. Thanks as always to Marianne and to Tom, who is now at the stage of wrestling with King Lear's at A level, though he has not so far felt any need to enlist the aid of his dad's book. Peter Barry, Aberystwyth. Page, no number, it should be page 1. Introduction. About this book. Para. The 1980s probably saw the high watermark of literary theory. That decade was the moment of theory when the topic was fashionable and controversial. In the 1990s, there was a steady flow of books and articles with titles like After Theory, bracket, Thomas Docherty, Docherty, 1990, bracket closed, or Post Theory, bracket, Nicholas Treadle, in the Critical Decade 1993, bracket closed, full stop. As such titles suggest, the, quote, moment of theory, unquote, has probably passed. So why another primer of theory so late in the day, question mark, para. The simple answer is that after the moment of theory, there comes inevitably the hour within quote of theory, when it ceases to be the exclusive concern of a dedicated minority and enters the intellectual bloodstream as a taken for granted aspect of the curriculum. At this stage, the glamour fades, the charisma is routinized, and it becomes the day-to-day business of quite a large number of people to learn or teach, or both, this material. There are evident dangers of oversimplifying things and so offering a false reassurance to students facing the difficulties of this topic for the first time. All the same, the main responsibility of anyone attempting a book like this one is to meet the demand for clear explanation and demonstration. If the task were impossible and the mountain of theory could be climbed only by experts, then the whole enterprise of establishing it on undergraduate courses would have been a mistake. Para. The emphasis on practice means that this is a workbook, not just a textbook. As you read, you will find suggested activities headed within quote, stop and think, unquote, which are designed to give you some, page 2, hand-on experience of literary theory and its problems. You will not just be reading about it, reducing theory to a kind of spectator sport played only by superstars, but starting to do it for yourself. Becoming a participant in this way will help you to make some personal sense of theory and will, I hope, increase your confidence even if you suspect that your practical efforts remain fairly rudimentary. It is also hoped that the stop and think activities will provide the basis for initiating a seminar discussion if this book is being used in connection with a taught course on critical theory.